In a single night in Las Vegas, Richard lost everything: his fortune, his empire, and his identity. But what seemed to be the end was, in fact, an unexpected new beginning. From luxury to simplicity, he would discover that true success is not measured in figures but in purpose. Are you ready for this twist? The neon lights of the Bellagio casino sparkled against the night sky of Las Vegas, reflecting in the determined eyes of Richard Mendoza. Wearing an impeccably tailored Italian suit, he adjusted his silk tie before pushing another stack of chips to the center of the roulette table. His fingers, adorned with a solid gold ring with a solitaire diamond, drummed softly on the green velvet of the table. "Everything on red 32, he announced with a confidence that masked the tremor in his voice. The croupier nodded with a professional smile, spinning the roulette wheel with mechanical precision. The momentary silence was broken only by the soft clinking of the ivory, ball against the polished metal. Richard ran his hand through the graying hair at his temples, a nervous habit he had developed over 20 years of building his real estate empire. Around him, other players watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. It wasn't every day that someone bet $5 million on a single number, but Richard wasn't thinking about the spectators. His mind was focused on the 15 million he had already lost in the last 6 hours. The ball continued its hypnotic trajectory, gradually losing speed. Richard felt his heart race. This bet wasn't just money. It was his last chance to recover everything he had lost on that fateful night. His empire, built with so much effort, depended on that moment. "No more bets," announced the croupier. Time seemed to slow down as the ball bounced between the numbers. Richard held his breath, his dilated pupils reflecting the movement of the ivory sphere. Finally, with one last treacherous jump, the ball found its destination. "Black 15, declared the croupier. Richard remained motionless, as if frozen in time. The chips were swept from the table with cruel efficiency, taking with them not just millions but 2 decades of hard work. His empire had just crumbled in a matter of seconds. "Any more bets, sir?" asked the croupier, his professional voice masking any trace of compassion. Richard rose mechanically from the table, his robotic movements betraying the whirlwind of emotions consuming him inside. He walked towards the casino bar, ordering a double whiskey with automatic gestures. As the amber liquid burned his throat, reality began to set in. His cell phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. It was Frank, his financial director, probably already aware of the astronomical transfers that had left the company's accounts. Richard ignored the call, just as he ignored the next 5 that followed. The bar began to spin slightly, a combination of alcohol and emotional exhaustion. The casino lights, once inviting and seductive, now seemed to mock his disgrace. Each distant laugh, each clink of chips, each slot machine, bell sounded like a note in a symphony of failure. Picking up his phone again, Richard scrolled through his contact list. Powerful names paraded across the screen: politicians, businessmen, celebrities, people who just a few hours ago would have treated him as an equal. Now they were just pixels on a screen, representing doors that would certainly close as soon as the news of his ruin spread. The bartender brought another whiskey without him asking. "Compliments of the house, Mr. Mendoza," he said with a smile. That mixed sympathy and pity. Even the casino staff already knew. In Vegas, bad news traveled at the speed of light. As the early morning hours advanced, Richard remained seated at the bar, watching his previous life disappear phone call after phone call. First came the partners, demanding explanations about the transfers. Then came the lawyers, warning about the legal implications. Finally, there were only automated messages from the bank, notifying about denied transactions. When the sun began to rise over the Nevada desert, Richard finally left the casino. His Italian suit, once immaculate, was wrinkled. The diamond ring had been left as collateral for his bar tab. He stopped on the sidewalk, blinking against the merciless morning light. A valet brought his Porsche, and Richard realized it would be the last time he would drive that car. In a few hours, it would be just another asset to be liquidated to cover his debts. He drove aimlessly through the streets of Las Vegas, the city that had witnessed his fall. In his penthouse apartment at Caesar's Palace, Richard began to do the Math. The reality was even worse than he had imagined. He hadn't just lost his personal money. He had bet and lost company resources, investment funds, operating reserves. His empire wasn't just broken, it was completely destroyed. Sitting on his balcony, watching the city wake up, Richard tried to understand how he had reached that point. The gambling addiction had always been there, hidden beneath the facade of success and power. But he had never imagined he could lose control so devastatingly. His phone rang again. It was Ellen, his ex-wife. She had probably already discovered the financial disaster. Richard let the call go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to explain how he had thrown away not just his fortune, but the future of hundreds of employees who depended on his company. The morning advanced, and with it came the first headlines on financial websites. Mendoza empire on the brink of collapse. Real estate tycoon loses fortune in casino. Mendoza Incorporation's stocks plummet after bankruptcy rumors. Richard watched it all with a surreal detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. But each new notification on his cell phone brought him back to the harsh reality. His jet-set friends were already starting to block his number. Invitations to events were cancelled. His social circle, built on the foundations of money and power, was crumbling like a house of cards. By the end of that morning, after a series of virtual meetings with lawyers and consultants, the full extent of the disaster became clear. There was no legal or financial way out. His reputation in the market was destroyed. No bank or investor would risk doing business with someone who had lost everything at a gambling table. Richard Mendoza, the man who less than 24 hours ago was celebrated as one of the most successful businessmen in the country, now found himself alone in his luxury penthouse, facing not just financial ruin, but the complete collapse of his identity. As he packed some personal belongings into a suitcase, the only ones he would be able to keep after creditors took everything, Richard had no idea that his true new beginning was about to happen, and that it would come from the hands of someone he barely remembered meeting. The bus jolted on the highway as Richard watched the landscape through the foggy window. His Italian suit, now wrinkled after days of continuous use, was completely out of place in the environment. Other passengers occasionally cast curious glances in his direction, probably wondering what a man of such refined appearance was doing on an interstate bus. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful night in Las Vegas. 3 weeks of closed doors, unanswered calls, and blocked accounts. His credit cards had been cancelled one after another. The Porsche had been repossessed at the hotel. The penthouse at Caesar's Palace already had new occupants. Richard closed his eyes, trying not to think about the luxury apartment in New York that was now under judicial possession, or his mansion in the Hamptons, which would be auctioned to pay part of the debts. Mendoza Incorporations, the company that had built some of the most imposing buildings in the country, was now just a pile of documents in the hands of judicial administrators. The cell phone in his pocket was silent, not for lack of battery, but because he had cancelled the premium line he had maintained for years. Now he used a cheap prepaid phone with only a few numbers saved. Most of the old contacts had already disappeared from his life, like leaves carried away by the autumn wind. "Next stop, Springfield," announced the driver over the bus's aging sound system. Richard adjusted himself in the uncomfortable seat. Springfield, his hometown, the place he had left 25 years ago, swearing to only return as a winner. Now he was returning, but not as he had imagined. The irony didn't escape him. His savings, or what was left of them after the devastation in Las Vegas, would last for a few weeks in a cheap hotel at most. After that, he would have to improvise. At 48, Richard Mendoza was essentially starting from scratch. The bus stopped at a gas station for a quick break. Richard got off, his numb legs protesting after hours of sitting. In the station's bathroom, he faced his reflection in the stained mirror. The sunken eyes betrayed sleepless nights. The beard, once meticulously trimmed in luxury barbershops, was uneven and graying. "Hey, aren't you that guy from TV?" asked the gas station attendant as Richard bought a cheap coffee. "The one with the buildings?" Richard mumbled something unintelligible and quickly moved away. Until a few weeks ago, it was common to see his face in business magazines and television programs. Now each recognition was like a needle in an open wound. Back on the bus, Richard tried to focus on his plan, or what approached one. He had some old contacts in Springfield, people he had known before his rise. Maybe some of them would remember the ambitious young man he once was, before the money and fame. As the landscape changed, signaling the approach to the city, memories began to surface. There was the mall where he worked as a salesman at 18. Further ahead, the building of the business school where he studied at night while working during the day, places he hadn't seen in decades, but which remained strangely familiar. The bus finally entered Springfield's bus station late in the afternoon. Richard got off with his single suitcase, containing a few changes of clothes, important documents, and a toiletry bag. It was all that remained of a life of luxury and ostentation. In the station lobby, he stopped in front of a newsstand. His face still graced some covers, but now accompanied by very different headlines than he used to see. The fall of the empire, from riches to rags, the story of the gambling tycoon, the end of the Mendoza era. Leaving the station, Richard was hit by the characteristic heat of the Midwest summer. Several taxis were waiting in line, their drivers waving in his direction. In other times, he wouldn't think twice before taking one. Now, every dollar needed to be carefully considered. He took out his prepaid cell phone and opened the ride-sharing apps. Even this small action made him smile bitterly. A month ago, he had a private driver at his disposal 24 hours a day. The app indicated a simple inn in the city center, with daily rates that fit his drastically reduced budget. During the journey, Richard observed the changes in the city. New buildings had emerged, some built by his own company in its glory years. Billboards advertised real estate developments, some of them projects his company had abandoned after the collapse. The driver tried to make conversation a few times, but Richard responded only with monosyllables. His mind was occupied with more urgent concerns. How long could he survive on his reserves? How would he rebuild his professional life with a destroyed reputation? Who would still agree to do business with the man who had lost an empire at a gambling table? The inn was exactly as the photos had shown, simple but clean and well-maintained. The room assigned to him was small, with a single bed, a modest wardrobe, and a tiny bathroom. For someone used to presidential suites, it seemed almost claustrophobic. Sitting on the narrow bed, Richard began to mentally list his possible contacts. In the city, most of the numbers in his old agenda belonged to people who probably no longer wanted to associate their name with his. He needed to resort to older connections, from the time when he was just another young man with ambitious dreams. It was then that a name emerged in his memory, almost like a whisper from the past. Amanda Silverman, his first administrative assistant when he was starting the company, a dedicated and competent young woman who had always shown surprising loyalty. Richard wondered what had happened to her after she left the company to pursue other paths. The sun was setting over Springfield, painting the sky in orange hues that reflected on the windows of the buildings. Richard Mendoza, the former real estate tycoon, lay down on the simple bed in his inn, not imagining that fate was about to reconnect him with his past in a way that would completely change his future. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air of the sunny morning in Springfield. Amanda Silverman adjusted the final details in her coffee shop, the cozy corner, before opening the doors for another day of work. The rustic wooden tables, carefully arranged under a pergola covered with jasmine, created a welcoming atmosphere that had become her trademark over the past 5 years. While arranging the artisanal breads in the display case, Amanda observed her reflection in the glass. At 42, she maintained the same determination in her brown eyes that she had when working as an administrative assistant in New York. Her dark hair, now with some silver strands that she had chosen not to hide, was tied in a relaxed bun. The bell on the door chimed, announcing the arrival of her first customer of the day. Amanda looked up, rehearsing her usual welcoming smile, but the smile froze on her lips. Standing at the door, wearing a visibly wrinkled suit, was Richard Mendoza. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Amanda felt transported 15 years into the past, to the corridors of Mendoza Incorporations. where she was just another administrative employee trying to impress her ambitious boss. But the man in front of her was no longer the imposing businessman she had known. There was something broken in his gaze, a vulnerability she had never imagined seeing. "Good morning," said Richard, his hoarse voice betraying the discomfort of the situation. He clearly hadn't recognized her yet. "A coffee, please, the strongest you have." Amanda took a deep breath, deciding whether or not to reveal her identity. In recent days, she had followed the spectacular fall of the Mendoza empire through the newspapers. Like many in the city, she had been shocked by the news, but unlike most, she knew a Richard from before fame and fortune. "Of course, Mr. Mendoza," she finally replied, observing the exact moment when recognition crossed his face. "I still take my coffee the same way you taught me. Extra strong, no sugar." Richard narrowed his eyes, studying her face. "Amanda? Amanda Silverman?" She nodded, allowing herself a genuine smile. "Welcome to my coffee shop. I never imagined seeing you again in Springfield, much less here." Richard remained motionless for a few moments, clearly processing the unexpected encounter. Amanda took the moment to observe him better. The dark spots under his eyes and the unshaven beard told a story of sleepless nights and constant worries. "This place is yours?" he finally asked, looking around with genuine interest. The coffee shop, though small, had a welcoming atmosphere that dramatically contrasted with the luxurious environments he was used to. "Yes, for 5 years now," Amanda replied, moving to prepare the coffee. "After I left Mendoza Incorporations, I decided to follow my dream. I started with a tiny coffee shop just for takeout. Gradually, I grew." As she prepared the coffee with precise and experienced movements, Amanda noticed Richard's discomfort. He alternated between looking at her and the environment, as if trying to reconcile the image of the former assistant with the confident woman now in front of him. "Sit down," she offered, indicating a discreet table in the corner. "This coffee is on the house. Consider it a thank you for the years of learning at the company." Richard accepted the offer with a silent nod, heading to the indicated table. Amanda watched as he settled in, noticing how his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. She prepared a tray with the coffee and some of her freshest artisanal breads, adding a slice of the cinnamon cake that was the house specialty. "You didn't need to do all this," he said, when she placed the tray on the table. "You look like you need a decent breakfast," Amanda replied naturally. "And believe me, my breads are famous in the city." The bell on the door chimed again, announcing the arrival of other customers. Amanda returned to the counter, leaving Richard with his thoughts. From time to time, she cast discreet glances in his direction, observing how he savored each item of the breakfast, with an expression that mixed surprise and gratitude. As the morning progressed, the coffee shop filled with the usual clientele. Hurried executives seeking their coffee before work, ladies gathering for their morning meetings, students taking advantage of the free Wi-Fi. Amanda kept busy, but her mind kept returning to Richard's unexpected presence. Near lunchtime, when the movement began to decrease, she noticed that he was still there, now looking out the window with a distant expression. His coffee had long since gone cold, and the plate with the breads was practically untouched. "More coffee," she offered, approaching with the thermos. Richard seemed to wake from a reverie. "No, thank you. Actually, I should go. How much do I owe?" "I already said it's on the house," Amanda replied firmly. Then, after a moment of hesitation, she added, "Actually, if you don't have other commitments, I'd like to talk. My shift ends in 2 hours." She saw the resistance in his eyes, the impulse to refuse and keep his wounded dignity protected, but she also saw something else, a glimmer of hope, perhaps, or simply the weariness of carrying his burdens alone. "I have no commitments," he finally admitted with a bitter smile. "I have absolutely nothing." Amanda nodded, understanding. "Then stay. I'll prepare something special for lunch, and afterward we can talk. No pressure, no judgments. Just two old acquaintances catching up." As she returned to the counter, Amanda felt the weight of Ricardo's gaze on her back. 15 years ago, she was just another employee trying to impress the ambitious boss. Now, fate had completely reversed their roles. And something in her heart told her that this reunion was not mere coincidence. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the pergola, creating a play of light and shadow on the table where Amanda and Ricardo were sitting. The cafe was practically empty now, with only a few lingering customers finishing their lunches. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee still hung in the air, mingling with the scent of jasmine. "So," Amanda began, serving 2 cups of fresh coffee, "how does it feel to be back in Ribeirão after so long?" Ricardo held the cup between his hands, feeling the comforting warmth through the porcelain. "Honestly, it's surreal. Every corner holds a memory, but at the same time, everything seems different. Or maybe I'm the one who's different." "Amanda," observed the man before her, so far removed from the imposing figure that used to roam the corridors of Mendonça Incorporações. The expensive suit was still there, but his shoulders carried an invisible weight, and his eyes had lost that ambitious gleam she so admired. "You know," she said, cutting a generous slice of apple, pie she had set aside especially for this moment, "I always wondered why you never came back, even at the height of your success, when the company opened a branch here." Ricardo tasted the pie, closing his eyes for a moment as he savored the flavor. "This is incredible," he complimented, before continuing, "As for not coming back, I think I was afraid." "Afraid?" Amanda tilted her head, curious. "The great Ricardo Mendonça afraid of something?" He laughed, a bitter and self-deprecating sound. "Afraid of remembering who I was before, the small-town boy who dreamed big. I thought if I looked back too much, I'd lose the drive to move forward." Amanda nodded, understanding. "And now?" "Now?" Ricardo ran his hand over his tired face. "Now I realize that maybe that small-town boy had something I lost along the way. Integrity, perhaps, or simply the ability to appreciate the simple things." The silence that followed was filled with the soft clinking of cutlery and the distant murmur of conversations from the last customers. Amanda watched Ricardo, remembering the years she worked as his assistant. "Do you remember?" she began, a nostalgic smile on her lips. "That time we stayed late at the office, finalizing the presentation for the Japanese investors." Ricardo furrowed his brow, searching his memory. "The business complex project? That's it. You were so nervous that you spilled coffee on your white shirt, and I had to run 3 blocks to a department store to buy a new one. And when you came back," he completed, a flash of the old Ricardo in his smile, "you had bought a blue shirt because you said it matched my eyes better." Amanda laughed. "And you closed the deal." "I did," he agreed, his smile fading. "It was Mendonça Incorporações' first big project, the beginning of everything." "You were different back then," Amanda observed, her voice soft. "Ambitious, yes, but also human?" Ricardo suggested with self-irony. "Passionate," she corrected, "not just about success, but about the work itself, about the idea of building something meaningful." Ricardo was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. "When did I lose that?" "Amanda, when did money and power become more important than everything else?" "Maybe you didn't lose it," she replied, standing up to get more coffee. "Maybe you just temporarily forgot." As Amanda moved around the cafe, Ricardo watched her with new eyes. There was a serenity about her that he didn't remember noticing before, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with bank accounts or social status. "How did you do it?" he asked when she returned. "Build all this from scratch?" Amanda smiled, looking around her cafe with evident pride. "One day at a time, a lot of work, some sleepless nights, and the certainty that I was following my true purpose." "It must have been difficult in the beginning." "It was," she admitted, "especially after being used to the frantic pace and glamour of São Paulo. But you know what I discovered? That there's a unique satisfaction in creating something with your own hands, in knowing each customer by name, in being part of the community." Ricardo absorbed her words, looking around the cafe with different eyes. Every detail, from the handcrafted cups to the carefully arranged plants, told a story of dedication and love for what she did. "And you?" Amanda asked, her voice gentle but direct. "What are your plans now?" Ricardo let out a heavy sigh. "Honestly, I don't know. All doors seem closed. Who's going to want to do business with someone who lost an empire at a gambling table? Amanda studied him for a moment, as if pondering something. Maybe, she said finally, you're looking at the wrong doors. What do you mean? Maybe this is your chance to rediscover that young man passionate about building meaningful things. Only this time without the pressure of impressing Wall Street or magazine covers. Ricardo frowned, considering her words. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower, casting longer shadows through the pergola. The cafe was completely empty now, creating an intimate atmosphere for this conversation that seemed to transit between past and present. I don't know if I'm still capable, he finally admitted, his voice almost a whisper. Amanda leaned across the table, her eyes meeting his with surprising intensity. The Ricardo Mendonça I knew was capable of anything he set his mind to. And you know what? I think he's still in there, somewhere. At that moment, something changed in the atmosphere. Between them, it wasn't just a former employee consoling an old boss. It was a strong and accomplished woman reaching out to someone who had lost their way. And for the first time since his world had crumbled, Ricardo felt a spark of hope. The morning had barely begun when Ricardo arrived at Cantinho Acolhedor. He wore a simple dress shirt and jeans, clothes that Amanda had suggested were more appropriate for work at the cafe than his Italian suits. Standing before the back door, he hesitated for a moment before knocking. Punctual, Amanda observed with a smile, opening the door. That's one quality that hasn't changed. The interior of the cafe's kitchen was a completely new environment for Ricardo. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the fluorescent light, and the aroma of bread baking in the oven filled the air. Amanda was already wearing her characteristic apron, her hair tied in a practical bun. First day as a kitchen assistant, she said, handing him a clean apron. Are you ready? Ricardo took the apron, feeling the rough fabric between his fingers. His hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts and handling casino chips, now trembled slightly at the prospect of working in a kitchen. I don't know if I'm the most suitable person for this, Amanda, he admitted as he tried to tie the apron. I've never worked with anything like this before. Amanda approached, helping him with the knot. Everyone starts somewhere. I didn't know anything about coffee when I started either. Now let's begin with something simple. The next few hours were a lesson in humility for Ricardo. Amanda taught him the basics, how to properly clean surfaces, organize ingredients, weigh flour for bread. Each task, no matter how simple it seemed, required an attention to detail he hadn't expected. Be careful with that cup, Amanda warned, when he almost dropped a delicate piece of porcelain. Every item here has a story. This cup, for example, I bought from a local artisan when I opened the cafe. It was one of the first pieces in the house. Ricardo held the cup more carefully, noticing the hand-painted details. In his old world, a broken cup would have been just a number on a cost spreadsheet. Here, every object seemed to have special meaning. As the morning progressed, the first customers began to arrive. Ricardo watched, fascinated, as Amanda interacted with each of them. She not only knew their names, but also their preferences, their stories. Donna Maria, how's your grandson? Has he recovered from the flu? She asked an elderly lady who entered leaning on a cane. Mr. João, today we have that multi-grain bread you like so much, she announced to a man in a simple suit who seemed to be a regular customer. During a lull in the rush, Ricardo found himself restocking the bread counter when a familiar voice surprised him. Ricardo Mendonça? Is that really you? He turned to find Carlos Junqueira, an old contact from the local real estate market. The man looked at him with a mixture of surprise and something that seemed like pity. Carlos, Ricardo replied, feeling his face burn. How are you? Good, but I must say I'm surprised to see you, well, here, working in a cafe. The condescending tone was evident. Before Ricardo could respond, Amanda appeared by his side. Ricardo is helping me expand the business, she said naturally. We're planning to open a second unit soon. The gentle lie caught Ricardo by surprise, but he maintained his composure. Carlos seemed momentarily disconcerted. Ah, of course, of course. Well, I need to go. Good luck with the venture. And he left hurriedly. You didn't have to do that, Ricardo said when they were alone. Amanda shrugged. People like Carlos only understand success in terms of money and status. It's not worth trying to explain that sometimes we need to start over to find our true path. The rest of the day passed in a steady rhythm of work. Ricardo learned to operate the espresso machine, although his first results were far from Amanda's standard. His hands, once immaculate, now had small steam burns and coffee stains. At the end of the day, as he helped clean the tables, Ricardo noticed something curious. Despite the physical exhaustion, he felt a strange satisfaction. It was different from the adrenaline of negotiations or the euphoria of gambling. It was something simpler, more genuine. How was your first day? Amanda asked as they closed the cafe. Ricardo considered the question for a moment. Different, tiring, but I don't know how to explain it. There's something comforting about working with your hands, seeing the immediate result of what you do. Amanda smiled, a smile that seemed to contain more understanding than she expressed in words. You know what I like most about this job? The real connection with people. They're not just customers or numbers on a spreadsheet. They're stories, their lives. Ricardo thought about all the developments he had built, the thousands of apartments and offices he had sold. He had never really considered the stories of the people who would occupy those spaces. Amanda, he said, hesitant. Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me after everything? She finished locking the door before answering. Because 15 years ago, when I was just an insecure administrative assistant, you gave me a chance. Remember what you told me back then? Ricardo shook his head, unable to recall. You said you saw potential in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. Now I'm just returning the favor because despite everything that's happened, I still see potential in you, Ricardo. Maybe a different kind of potential than you imagined for yourself, but it's there. Amanda's words echoed in Ricardo's mind as he walked back to his modest inn. The sun was setting over Ribeirão Preto, and for the first time since his fall, he didn't feel completely lost. 2 weeks had passed since Ricardo started working at Cantinho Acolhedor. His hands, once smooth and protected, now had small calluses, marks of a life he never imagined living. On that particularly busy Saturday morning, he was surprised to realize that he could already anticipate the orders of regular customers. Cappuccino. With cinnamon for Donna Amelia, he muttered to himself, preparing the drink even before the elegant grey-haired lady reached the counter. And a warm cheese bread, because she always shares it with her grandson when he comes to visit on weekends. Amanda, who was organizing some invoices near him, smiled when she heard him. You're starting to get the hang of it, she commented, and Ricardo felt an inexplicable warmth when he noticed the approval in her voice. The cafe was especially crowded that day. A craft fair had been set up in the square across the street, bringing a steady stream of visitors. Ricardo moved between tables with an ease that would have surprised his former self, balancing trays and memorizing orders. I never thought I'd see the day when Ricardo Mendonça would serve coffee, said a familiar voice, interrupting his rhythm. Ricardo turned to find Beatriz Campos, a former client of Mendonça Incorporações, sitting at one of the outdoor tables. Her tone wasn't mocking, but genuinely curious. Beatriz, he greeted, maintaining his composure. What would you like today? She studied him for a moment before answering. You know, when I heard about what happened in Las Vegas, I was shocked like everyone else, but seeing you now, there's something different. Ricardo felt uncomfortable under her analytical gaze. The house coffee is excellent. Amanda has a special supplier that... I'm not talking about the coffee, Beatrice interrupted gently. I'm talking about you, your eyes. They seem more alive now than when you were running those board meetings. Before Ricardo could respond, Amanda appeared by his side. Beatrice, what a wonderful surprise, she exclaimed with genuine pleasure. You haven't tried our new berry pie yet, have you? Ricardo learned the recipe last week and is doing an amazing job. Beatrice raised her eyebrows, surprised. Ricardo Mendonça making pies. And very well, I might add, Amanda confirmed proudly. He has a natural talent for pastry that no one suspected. As Amanda took Beatrice's order, Ricardo headed to the kitchen, his emotions in turmoil. It was true, in the past few weeks, he had discovered an unexpected pleasure in learning confectionery techniques with Amanda. There was something almost meditative about measuring ingredients, mixing doughs, decorating desserts. In the kitchen, as he separated a generous slice of the berry pie, Ricardo found himself reflecting on Beatrice's words. Was he really different? The man who used to measure success in millions now felt pride in seeing the satisfied smile of customers when they tasted his creations. "You really have a knack for this," said Amanda, entering the kitchen as he was finishing decorating the plate. "Your hands, they have sensitivity." Ricardo looked at his own hands, now covered in flour. "It's funny," he commented. "I spent years signing million-dollar contracts, but I had never really created anything with my own hands." Amanda approached, helping him clean a small splash of red syrup that had spilled on the edge of the plate. Her gentle perfume, a mix of lavender and something else he couldn't identify, enveloped him momentarily. Their fingers touched lightly, and Ricardo felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the kitchen temperature. "Sometimes," said Amanda, her voice softer than usual, "we need to lose everything to discover who we really are." Their gazes met, and for a moment the rest of the world seemed to disappear. The buzz of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the conversations of customers, everything faded into the background. Ricardo realized with surprising clarity that he was developing feelings for Amanda that went far beyond gratitude. The moment was broken by the sound of a tray falling in the main area of the cafe. Amanda quickly moved away, returning to her professional role. "I better go see what happened. Can you take the pie to Beatrice?" Ricardo nodded, trying to reorganize his thoughts. As he walked back to the dining room with the beautifully decorated plate, he realized that his life had changed in ways he could never have predicted. It wasn't just the manual labor or the simplicity of his new routine. It was something deeper, more meaningful. "Here you go," he said, placing the pie in front of Beatrice. "I hope you enjoy it." Beatrice tried a piece and her eyes widened in genuine surprise. "This is really incredible," she praised. "You know, Ricardo, maybe losing that empire was the best thing that happened to you." Ricardo watched Amanda across the cafe, helping an elderly customer settle into a chair. She had a unique way of making each person feel special, valued. It was a kind of wealth his old self would never have recognized. "Maybe you're right, Beatrice," he replied softly. "Maybe you're right." The rest of the day passed in a fast-paced rhythm, but Ricardo barely felt the fatigue. Every smile from Amanda, every moment their paths crossed in the tight kitchen, every glance shared over a cup of coffee seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. At the end of the workday, as they cleaned the cafe together, Ricardo realized that he had found something that money could never buy, a sense of purpose, and perhaps just maybe, the beginning of true love. The sun had not yet risen when Ricardo arrived at the cafe that morning. In recent days, he had developed the habit of arriving early to prepare the dough for breads and cakes, discovering an unexpected pleasure in the silence of the kitchen before the morning rush. However, something surprised him. A black Mercedes-Benz parked in front of the establishment. He immediately recognized the man leaning on the car's hood, Victor Salvatore, his former partner in Sao Paulo. The Italian businessman, always impeccable in his tailored suits, seemed out of place on the still sleeping street of Ribeirão Preto. "Ricardo, mio amico," exclaimed Victor, opening his arms in a theatrical gesture. "It's been so long." Ricardo felt his stomach churn. Victor always appeared with big ideas and tempting proposals, but rarely with good intentions. "What are you doing here, Victor?" "Can't I visit an old friend?" Victor smiled, his white teeth gleaming. "Especially when that friend is, let's say, in need of help." "I'm fine, thank you," Ricardo replied dryly, heading for the cafe door. "Working in a cafe?" Victor laughed, following him. "Ricardo Thompson, the man who built the country's largest real estate empire, serving cappuccinos, Please let me help you regain your dignity. Ricardo stopped, his hand on the doorknob. What exactly do you want, Victor? The Italian looked around, making sure they were alone. I have a proposal for you. The Arab investors still trust your name, Ricardo. They don't care about what happened in Las Vegas. In fact, some even admire your, as they say, audacity. Arab investors? Ricardo frowned, his professional curiosity involuntarily piqued. Exactly. They're looking for someone to manage a new real estate fund. $5 billion to start, and they want you. Ricardo felt his heart race. $5 billion. It was more than he had ever managed, even at the peak of his career. Of course, Victor continued, his voice smooth as velvet, we would need to work around some legal formalities. Your name would be in the background officially, but the decision-making power would be all yours. And the commission, he paused dramatically, 2% of the total fund value, $100 million. The number echoed in Ricardo's mind like a bell. With that money, he could rebuild everything he had lost. More than that, he could prove to the world that he was still Ricardo Thompson. Give me a few days to think about it, he mumbled, unlocking the cafe door. Victor smiled, satisfied. I'll be in town until Friday. Oh, and Ricardo? He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket, a small advance to show the seriousness of the proposal. Ricardo mechanically took the envelope, feeling the distinctive weight of several bundles of notes. As soon as Victor departed in his gleaming Mercedes, he leaned against the kitchen wall, breathing heavily. Ricardo? Amanda's voice startled him. She was standing at the back door, a concerned expression on her face. Is everything okay? I saw a car leaving. He quickly hid the envelope in his apron pocket. Everything's great, he replied, forcing a smile. Just an acquaintance stopping by to say hello. Amanda studied him for a moment, her scrutinizing eyes seeming to see beyond his words. Without saying anything, she began preparing the dough for the day's bread. Ricardo watched her work, her movements precise and confident, so different from the agitation he felt inside. The day passed like a fog for Ricardo. While serving coffees and attending to customers, his mind kept returning to Victor's proposal. The envelope in his pocket seemed to burn, constantly reminding him of the choice he would have to make. During a lull in the afternoon's activity, he observed Amanda interacting with a family of regular customers. She had just prepared a special hot chocolate for the couple's youngest daughter, decorating it with a heart design in the foam. The genuine joy on the girl's face upon seeing the drawing and Amanda's sweet smile stirred something in his chest. You're different today, Amanda commented later as they cleaned the counter together. Distant. Ricardo hesitated, feeling the weight of the envelope in his pocket. He looked at Amanda, at her sincere eyes, at the way a stubborn strand of hair always escaped from her bun during work, at the small expression lines that formed when she smiled. He realized, with painful clarity, that he was developing deep feelings for her. Amanda, he began, his voice hoarse, have you ever wondered if you're wasting your potential? If you could be doing something bigger? She stopped what she was doing, turning to face him completely. Bigger by what standards, Ricardo? The question caught him by surprise. Well, you're intelligent, capable. You could be managing a chain of cafes or... You still don't understand, do you? She interrupted softly. It's not about the size of the business or the number in the bank account. It's about doing something that has meaning, something that makes a difference in people's lives, even if it's just one cup of coffee at a time. Ricardo felt the weight of the envelope more intensely. In his pocket was the promise of returning to his old life of power and prestige. But looking at Amanda, at the cafe she had built with so much love and dedication, he began to question what it really meant to be successful. The doorbell chimed, announcing the arrival of more customers. Amanda gave Ricardo one last meaningful look before going to attend to them. He stayed behind, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange that reflected in the cafe windows. Ricardo watched the shadows lengthen, aware that he was facing a choice that would define not only his future, but also the kind of man he would choose to be. Thursday dawned with a fine rain over Ribeirão Preto. Ricardo was sitting in his room. At the guest house, Victor's envelope still unopened on the simple table. Beside it, a cup of the special coffee Amanda had given him the day before was slowly cooling. His fingers drummed on the worn wood of the table as his mind replayed the conversation with Victor. $5 billion, 100 million in commission. Numbers that would once have made his heart race with ambition now provoked a strange feeling of emptiness. He picked up his cell phone and opened Victor's last message. Dinner tonight at La Cucina, 8 p.m. Bring your answer. The Italian restaurant was the most luxurious in town, a place where he himself used to close deals in his old life. The sound of rain against the window brought memories of the previous morning at the cafe. Amanda was teaching him how to make a new type of croissant, her hands guiding his in the delicate technique of folding the dough. The warmth of her body close to his, the soft scent of her hair, the genuine laughter when he made a joke about his initial clumsiness with the dough. "You have an artist's hands," she had said. "You just need to believe in yourself more." Ricardo abruptly stood up, grabbing his umbrella. He needed to think, and his small room was too suffocating. He walked through the wet streets of Ribeirão Preto, observing the city awaken. Shopkeepers opening their stores, students rushing not to miss. The bus, ordinary people living their simple but dignified lives. His steps unconsciously led him to the cozy corner. The cafe was still closed. It was his day off, after all. But through the windows he could see Amanda organizing everything for another day of work. She seemed completely absorbed in her task, a serene smile on her face as she arranged fresh flowers on the tables. It was then that something caught his attention. At the table near the window, an elderly gentleman was sitting alone, although the cafe wasn't officially open yet. Amanda approached him with a steaming cup and a piece of cake. Ricardo recognized the man. It was Mr. Joseph, a regular customer, who had recently lost his wife. Through the rain-misted glass, Ricardo watched the scene unfold. Amanda not only served the coffee, but sat for a few minutes with the gentleman, listening to him with genuine attention. The old man's face, previously marked by sadness, gradually softened during the conversation. "This place isn't just a cafe, Ricardo," Amanda had once told him. "It's a refuge, a meeting point, a little piece of home for many people." At that moment, observing that simple interaction through the rain-wet window, Ricardo felt something break and rebuild inside him. The envelope in his pocket, which before had weighed like lead, now seemed ridiculously insignificant. At 7:55 p.m., Ricardo entered La Cucina. The maître d' recognized him immediately, leading him to the table where Victor was already waiting, a bottle of Italian wine open on the impeccably white tablecloth. "Ricardo!" exclaimed Victor, standing to greet him. "Were you already missing the old times? This place reminds me of our business meetings." Ricardo sat down, politely declining the offered glass of wine. "Victor, I need to tell you something." The Italian smiled, leaning forward. "Of course, amico. But first, let me tell you more about the project. The investors have already prepared all the documents." "No," Ricardo interrupted softly. Victor blinked, confused. "What do you mean, no?" "I'm not going to participate in the project." Ricardo took the envelope from his pocket, returning it intact on the table. "And I can't accept this either." "Ricardo, have you gone mad?" Victor lowered his voice, leaning further forward. "We're talking about $100 million. It's your chance to get back to the top." "The top of what, exactly?" Ricardo smiled, a calm smile that surprised even himself. "You know, in the last few months I've learned something important. Success isn't just about numbers in a bank account." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying him with disbelief. "It's because of that woman from the cafe, isn't it? Ricardo, be rational." "For the first time in a long time, I'm being completely rational." Ricardo stood up. "And yes, Amanda is part of it. She showed me that there are different ways to be successful in life, but more importantly, she helped me rediscover who I really am." "And who are you?" Victor asked with a touch of disdain. Someone who finally understood that wealth isn't measured only in money. Ricardo adjusted his simple blazer, the last remaining piece from his old wardrobe. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go. I wake up early tomorrow to make croissants. Leaving the restaurant, Ricardo felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The rain had stopped and the night air was clean and fresh. His steps automatically led him to the cozy corner. The lights were still on, and through the window he could see Amanda making preparations for the next day. Without hesitation, he knocked on the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to see him there. "Ricardo, did something happen?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman he was falling in love with, but also everything she represented: integrity, purpose, true love for what she did. "I needed to tell you something," he began, his heart beating fast. "Today I made a decision that changed my life, and you're a big part of the reason why." Amanda watched him with her expressive eyes, waiting for him to continue. The soft light from the cafe illuminated her face, creating a golden halo around her loose hair. "I realized that sometimes we need to lose everything to find something much more valuable." Ricardo took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "And I found it. I found a purpose. I found a place where I belong, and I found you." The morning sun filtered through the windows of the cozy corner, creating golden patterns on the still empty tables. Amanda and Ricardo worked side by side in the kitchen, preparing the dough for the day. The silence between them was comfortable, charged with unspoken promises after the previous night's conversation. "You really turned down the offer?" Amanda finally asked, her skilled hands shaping a croissant with precision. $100 million is a lot of money, Ricardo. He stopped what he was doing, turning to face her. "You know what I realized? That for the first time in years, I'm truly happy. Not that superficial happiness of closing a big deal or winning a bet, but something deeper." Amanda smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "And what makes you so happy now?" "This," he replied, gesturing around. "The smell of fresh bread in the morning, the smile of customers when they taste something I helped make, the satisfaction of creating something with your own hands." He paused, gathering courage. "And you, Amanda, especially you." She put the croissant she was shaping on the baking sheet, wiping her hands on her apron before approaching him. "You know what I like most about you now, Ricardo? Your authenticity. There are no more masks, no more weight of appearances." Ricardo felt his heart race when Amanda gently touched his face, removing a bit of flour that had splashed on his cheek. Her touch was gentle, but charged with electricity. "I have an idea," he said, holding her hand before she could pull away. "How about we expand the cafe?" Amanda frowned, surprised. "Expand? What do you mean?" "Not in the way Victor suggested, with chains and franchises," Ricardo quickly explained. "But we can do something special right here, that empty space next door. Have you ever thought about turning it into a baking school?" Amanda's eyes lit up. "A school?" "Yes. We could teach people who, like me, need a fresh start. Former executives, people in career transition, young people looking for a profession. Share not just techniques, but values." Amanda watched him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You really have changed, haven't you?" "Thanks to you," he replied softly. "You showed me that success can have many different meanings." Dr. Bell chimed, announcing the arrival of the first customer of the day. But before Amanda could pull away, Ricardo gently held her by the arm. "Have dinner with me tonight," he invited. "I know a special place." She smiled, a smile that lit up her whole face. "You're not going to take me to La Cucina, are you?" Ricardo laughed. "No, I was thinking of something more authentic." That night, Ricardo took Amanda to a small family restaurant on the outskirts of town. The place was simple but cozy, with checkered tablecloths and candles in old wine bottles. The owner, Mr. Giovanni, was an Italian gentleman who kept his nonna's recipes alive. "This place reminds me of my childhood," Ricardo explained as they settled at a table in the garden. "My parents used to bring me here on special occasions. This is where we celebrated when I was accepted into college." Amanda looked around, absorbing the details. The lights hung between the trees, the aroma of basil and garlic in the air, the soft sound of Italian music in the background. "It's perfect," she said. As they shared homemade pasta and a bottle of red wine, they talked about the future. Riccardo shared his ideas for the baking school, his enthusiasm growing as he described the details of the project. "We could create a scholarship program," Amanda suggested, her eyes shining with possibility. "Give opportunities to people who really need them." "And use local suppliers," Riccardo added. "Support the community that supported us." As the night progressed, the conversation flowed naturally between professional and personal subjects. Amanda told about her initial dreams for the cafe, the difficulties she faced, the small victories that kept her going forward. "You're extraordinary, you know," said Riccardo, admiring how the candlelight danced on her face. "You always were. Even when you worked for me, you already had something special. I was just too busy with numbers and status to notice." Amanda blushed slightly, but held his gaze. "And you always had this sensitive side, Riccardo. It was just buried under layers of expectations and pressures. When Mr. Giovanni brought the dessert, a tiramisu made according to his family recipe, Riccardo realized he was living a perfect moment, not because of the place or the food, but because of the company. "Amanda," he began, his heart beating fast, "I need to tell you something." She put her fork on the plate, giving him her full attention. "I love you," he said simply, "not just for extending your hand to me when I needed it most, but for who you are. For your strength, your integrity, your ability to see the best in people." Tears shone in Amanda's eyes. "I love you too, Riccardo. And not despite what happened, but because of who you've become through it all." At that moment, under the stars of a spring night in Ribeirão Preto, Riccardo realized he had found something that all his old empire couldn't buy: true love and the chance to make a difference in people's lives, one loaf of bread at a time. 6. Months had passed since that night at Mr. Giovanni's restaurant. The cozy corner had transformed. The space next door, previously empty, now housed the New Beginnings Baking School, a project that had already changed dozens of lives. On that special morning of the inauguration of the new space, Riccardo proudly observed the first class of students. Among them was a former banker who had lost everything in the stock market, a young woman who had dropped out of law school to pursue her passion for confectionery, and even a retired gentleman who had always dreamed of learning how to make bread. "Welcome to our school," Richard began, his voice filled with emotion. "Each of you is here for a different reason, but you all share something in common: the courage to start anew." Emily, standing by his side, gently squeezed his hand. She was radiant. In her chef's, uniform, the engagement ring, a delicate piece with a single pearl shining on her left hand. "When I lost everything I had," Richard continued, "I thought my life was over. But I discovered that sometimes we need to lose something to gain something much more valuable." The classroom was cozy and modern, equipped with individual workstations and a large professional oven. On the walls, framed photos told the story of the cafe, from Emily's first small store to the current expansion. "Our first lesson will be on Italian bread," announced Emily, taking the floor. "But before we start with the technique, I want you to understand something important. Making bread is not just about mixing ingredients. It's about patience, dedication, and love for what we do." As Emily conducted the class, Richard circulated among the students, offering tips and sharing his own learning experience. It was surreal to think that just a few months ago, he himself didn't know how to differentiate between fresh yeast and dry yeast. During the break, Richard found Beatrice among the visitors who came to honor the inauguration. "So this is what happens when Richard Carter really falls in love with something," she commented with a smile. "With something and with someone," he corrected, his gaze finding Emily across the room. The day passed in a whirlwind of activities. In addition to the inaugural class, there was a small opening ceremony with the presence of the local press. Richard noticed with satisfaction that the headlines were now very different. Ex-tycoon finds new vocation in social project, bakery. School offers fresh start for professionals in transition. At the end of the afternoon, when the last visitors had already left, Richard and Emily sat in the cafe's pergola, sharing a slice of the first bread made by the students. "It's not perfect," Emily commented, tasting a piece, "but it has something special." "What?" Richard asked, although he already knew the answer. "It was made with love," she answered simply. Richard looked around at the space they had created together. The cafe remained as welcoming as ever, but now it had a new, vibrant energy. From the kitchens came the promising aroma of baking bread. The students had insisted on staying late to practice. "You know," he said, "the other day I found an old business magazine. It had an article about me, from the height of Carter developments. It talked about my $5 billion empire." Emily watched him curiously. "And how did you feel?" "Fulfilled," he replied, surprising her. "But not for the reason you're thinking. I felt fulfilled because that empire brought me here. To you. To this life we've built together." She smiled, that smile that still made his heart beat faster. "And what comes next?" Richard intertwined his fingers with hers. Now we'll continue doing what we love. We'll get married in Mr. Giovanni's garden, expand the school to other cities, maybe open a community bakery. But mainly we'll continue transforming lives, one loaf at a time." The sun was setting over Riverside, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. At the cozy corner, the lights were beginning to come on, creating that welcoming atmosphere. That had become their trademark. "Did you know the cafe has never been more profitable?" Emily commented. "Looks like your business experience came in handy after all." Richard laughed. "The difference is that now profit isn't the main goal. It's just a consequence of doing something with love and purpose." A group of students left, the school proudly carrying their first batches of bread. Their faces shone with that unique satisfaction of creating something with their own hands. "I think I finally understood," Richard said, observing the scene. "The true meaning of success." Emily tilted her head, resting it on his shoulder. "And what is it?" "It's making a difference in people's lives. It's waking up every day eager to work. It's having someone special to share the achievements and challenges with." He gently kissed her forehead. "This is what we've built here, Emily. It's not just a business, it's a legacy of love." The stars were beginning to appear in the riverside sky, silent witnesses to a story of transformation, new beginnings, and true love. At the cozy corner, a new batch of bread was about to come out of the oven, filling the air with its promising fragrance. It was the scent of success, not the one measured in dollars, but the one measured in smiles, in transformed lives, and in fulfilled hearts. Dear listeners, we hope that Richard and Emily's story has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of transformation and love, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of new beginnings. Tell us in the comments, what was the moment that touched you the most in Richard and Emily's journey? Which city are you following us from? We look forward to seeing you in our upcoming content.